You know, when you look up at the stars at night, they become far more interesting when you know what you're looking at. This is the Orion constellation, named after the giant super hunter of Greek mythology, the son of Poseidon. It is an area in the sky that has drawn quite a bit of attention from ancient people around the world. But why? Why is that? Not to mention the star series. There are monuments. You know, they just keep finding these pyramids everywhere. They're in the deserts, they're in the jungles, they're in the mountains, in the Arctic, in the oceans. They're all over the place. And when you look in Mexico, when you look in Egypt, you think, why would someone build these structures to mirror this constellation Orion? I mean, is this the answer to the question of who constructed them? Did you notice, folks, there are a lot of discoveries being made right now, and old tales of the ancients are coming back to life. What we used to call science fiction and ancient folklore seems to be making its way into our reality. So let us take a closer look at this constellation, these structures, the ancient Egyptians, and the beings they believe to be the gods of Orion.
Well, this is another tease for a song. The serious mystery we're talking about. Remember, if you remember last week, Brother Leroy wasn't here, or Brother Kaba.
Yes.
Right? But we're talking about a tribe of Dogons living in Mali, 8 hours from anything civilized, and they're supposed to have been the ancient, ancestors of the ancient Egyptians. And they have this religion that teaches them that there's a star system called Sirius Mystery in the stars. Supposedly, aliens came from this system and gave them this knowledge of the stars. The scientists discovered planet Sirius B in 1950. So these Dogons who exposed their knowledge to a French anthropologist in the 30s, or the 20s and 30s. I think they lived amongst them 30 years, and they wrote a book.
Pale Fox.
The Pale Fox, which is similar to the Sirius Mystery. But this book came out in the 70s by all consideration, a white supremacist. But he uses these analogies to preach the Greek religion or the Greek philosophy. And most people don't believe that aliens came from the planet Sirius and gave this knowledge to the Dogons. So this is the presentation today, because we had a big argument last week about whether aliens exist. If anybody saw this, last week, Graham was on and Clinique, and they. Did you see the show last week?
Yeah, I saw it.
Cinque. You saw it, all right. So tell us what you think, brother.
Well, I'm going to defer to our brother here, Kaba, because Kaba is not only a scholar in and of himself, but Brother Kaba has been a part of the First World Lecture Series. Mm-hmm. And as a result, he has seen and heard Dr. Finch,
right.
Charles Finch of Atlanta. You've heard others. You've heard the brother up in Massachusetts, I'm not thinking of his name, Bynum, Dr. Edward Bynum.
Absolutely.
And you've done your own research, Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark. And they I'll just say this before
What
the
about
brother.
what the part I had you read there?
Okay. Well, the thing is,
41.
we're the original people of the planet Earth.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
And the European is a new people.
Right. Okay.
And the knowledge that we have has been covered up, according to the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, during the time that they were destined to rule, and that rule is ending now.
Right.
We're in the wane of in the dawn of a new day.
Mm-hmm.
So when we read what they have to say, we take in the facts that have even been closed off to us because it's been buried.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, my own particular position, I recognize that they could not give credit to black people of Earth for any innovation, any buildings. They're going to come up with the pyramids were built by some group from
They're gonna lie.
beyond Mars because
They're gonna
they cannot do this. They just can't and maintain white supremacy.
Is that a reason why we don't believe that aliens came from this system?
Well, the box that the so-called Negro has been living in is a prison. That box has been the mindset that has been put on us by the enemy.
Okay.
The enemy has put a mindset on us and has given us degrees within that mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, when anybody comes to them with something outside of that mindset, I'm not talking about him, something outside of that mindset which says, hey, the black man is the original man.
Right.
The black man created this, that, and the other.
Amen.
Black people or the Negro mindset can't absorb it.
Right.
It's
Exactly.
dissonance. They call it cognitive dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of this book, the information is good.
Okay.
But he doesn't have the key.
Well, how about the passage I asked you to read?
Well,
About the beginning,
talking
the
about
starting point of creation.
Well, they're still finding out how they were made, and in terms of what I read it, but I'm a student to this.
Right.
I'm a student to this.
Right.
The value that a brother Leroy has been that I have tapped into a number of information sources during my lifetime that has given me an awareness. So I can go to certain books, Stolen Legacy, for example. I can go to other books.
Blacks in Science.
Blacks in Science, which we mentioned 2 weeks ago,
Right.
by Ivan Ben Sertima.
Right.
So I don't propose to be able to even decipher this, but in terms of looking at it, when I read new scientific evidence of alien contact 5,000 years ago.
Oh, it's beyond that.
And
It's way beyond that. Too.
Yeah. So, our brother
Leroy.
I'm in the classroom now, brother Aru.
Well, that's why we have you here today. I mentioned your name last week. I said, well, since in case then.
I'm a student on this bad boy.
Wow.
I mean, your name was all over last week's show. Well, see, I'm going to get Booker T. Coleman on next week, and he'll tell us the story. So, Brother Leroy, Brother Kaba.
Well, you know, my thing,
Kaba.
first let me thank you, my brother Gilchrist,
My
for
pleasure, man.
inviting me on this program. It's been a while since we've had a chance to do this. We go back a long ways, and I really appreciate the work you're doing for the community and for all of us.
Thank you.
To bring this information. So I appreciate you giving me this opportunity. And Brother Leroy, we go back to the ways when we do radio. So I enjoy being with you also.
Yes, sir. Thank you, brother.
And to me, it's just important that as African people, I believe, like for instance, one of the first things I did when Minister Farrakhan instructed us to read when the newly crowned president, I reread The Fall of America by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, which I would encourage every black person to reread that or read it for the first time. The Fall of America by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. You have to understand this because he prophesized what is happening to us right now.
Really?
And it's a really very powerful concept. And also tie that in with Malcolm's last most important proverb, which sort of kind of got him tied up when he said chickens have come home to roost.
Right.
Even this past week, what we've experienced in churches in Texas and storms that we've seen coming, You know, humans are not just angry. Nature is angry. You know, and science is the study of nature, and nature is the essence of God.
All right. Amen.
And so it's important that as we move through this as African people, even the title alone, there are so many challenges I have scientifically with this. See, African folk, the way African folk mind work is rich, so deep, deep thought, deep in metaphor, deep in personification, deep in those areas of language, deep in areas of trying to get back. And what we're tripping over, I believe, is our neurons have been forced to connect in a shallow pond of water where we're ready to go deep. And I think as I've experienced our children in the Board of Education and schools that I go to, our children are deeper than the teachers who are teaching them.
That's right.
And even we teachers who try to get deep with them is difficult because of the way in which the society holds us captured in that classroom as to what we should educate our children on. 5,000 years ago, there is now evidence,
That's
and you know, we talk about it. Dr. Leonard Jeffries talks about the concept of West Africa and the richness and the plushness of what is today the Sahara Desert. I'm doing a series on ancient West Africa, where we are now beginning to look at two geological periods, the Pliocene period, which is somewhere around 11,000 BC, and the Holocene period, which we are at the end of now, but began about 5,000 years. And what we're looking at is that at one point in history in West Africa, geographically speaking, from the country we call Algeria, coming straight down across West Africa and emptying out off the coast of Mauritania in that area, Cape Timorous, that there was a river known as the Tamanrasset River. And the reason why we see that river is because there's a Japanese satellite that has taken pictures of what's under the Sahara Desert. And they have found hippopotami, bones of hippopotami, bones of fish, bones of... So if you're in the middle of a desert and you see fish and hippopotami and other water-dwelling entities, there had to have been a river there one time.
Of course.
So that was what was called the AHP, the African Humid Phase, where the river connected. But what we have to now go back is we have to see that the Hapi River, the Nile River, actually connected with the Tamanrasset River. And that in fact in the ancient world, when it was very plush and a lot of water, the Hapi River connected with just about every river in Africa. The Limpopo in the south, the Congolese River, the Tamanrasset River that connected with the Senegal River, connected with the Niger River. So early Africans could literally travel across Africa just by water. But because we have this current world of deserts and tributaries being cut off, we think the Nile River just travels a certain way and that's it. But at one time, the Hapi flowed out throughout the entire continent of Africa. That was hundreds of thousands of years ago. So as long as we allow people, such as this gentleman, to guide our conversation, we'll always be limited in our scope of the greatness of African people.
What about his premise about the starting of creation?
As it relates to creation,
Well, let's read that. Would you read that section for me?
Because I want to take you beyond the Dogon. I want to tell you where the Dogon got it from. It's called the Shabaka Stone, which is a rewritten version of an older document called the Memphite text. And then I could take you to the Pyramid text where they talk about how the creation story literally can go back into the stars.
Well, I just wanted to stick this far back because of this. We're going to go into Hidden Colors 4.
Okay.
Showing white supremacy. Okay.
And by the way, I don't call it white supremacy anymore. I call it white fragility.
Okay.
White and supreme are two words that can't go together. People who conduct themselves a certain way, they're fragile. They're insecure. They suffer from an inferiority complex. And the more guns they have, the more afraid they are, the more fragile they are. The idea of supreme gives them a sense of greatness and grandeur and majesty. No, that's not what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with very fragile, mentally disturbed people that need to be put in check.
Well, Trump is a classic example.
He is their spokesperson. I'm so happy he's president. Because we needed him.
The starting of creation?
Okay. The starting point of creation is the star which revolves around Sirius and is actually named the Sagittarius star. It is regarded by the Dogon as the smallest and heaviest of all the stars. It contains the germs of all things. Its movement on its own axis and around Sirius upholds all creation in space. We shall see that its orbit determines the calendar.
It's phenomenal. And but
And this is where the gods, like in the opening piece, Isis, Sar, came from.
came before that. Because when you're looking at science and you're looking at superclusters, see for me and our ancestors, they put science in allegory.
Okay.
They took scientific facts and they told mythological stories, allegories, metaphors. That behind the metaphor was the truth of the science. Peoples of Eurasian descent are like believing in Santa Claus, believing in mythologies of these phenomenal metaphors that are actually masking.
The Greeks.
Yeah, the Greeks couldn't
which
get.
he goes, it's full of Greek analogies. in
Well,
here.
Digitaria alone, Africans, the Dogon called it Kizi Uzi,
Right.
the littlest of things. They
Right.
call the star itself Tolo. Tolo meaning
Right,
star
right,
and
right,
Bo
right.
meaning the
That's
smoke.
all in here.
It's there.
Yeah.
That's the African perception. But he can't, as I've read the book, he can't describe the African perspective because his neurons are not connected
Right.
like African. His neurons are connected like the Greeks.
Yeah, you can read it all in here.
And it becomes very shallow.
Yeah.
And you see, the idea of a supercluster exploding and creating clusters, clusters creating galaxies, galaxies creating stars, all explosions
Right.
within, implosions of these living entities that come out of the Nun, which is the Shabaka stone.
Okay.
And then out of this, our star, our solar system gives birth to planets.
Okay.
Okay? And so the concept of Kizi Uzi, the smallest of things, being the germ of all things, well, our sun is the same thing, but it is a microcosm of the macrocosm.
But it's a description of what a dwarf star is.
Absolutely. Well, a dwarf star in a sense that a dwarf star is a star that is now beginning to turn in on itself.
It collapsed.
And collapse.
All right,
And when it collapses to a certain point, it's going to explode again and becomes a nursery for
Another
another star
creation.
system, another creation. This is science, but our Africans had this story down packed. It was a beautiful story.
Way long time ago.
A long time ago, beyond words that we could ever explain. We don't even know. We don't have concepts of the time. And that is what made the...
What about in the beginning here? They're talking about the pyramids being designed according to the Orion system.
Now, the Africans called it Asar. Orion is a Greek concept.
Right,
Child of
right.
Poseidon.
Okay.
Orion comes from Asar,
Right.
the hunter.
Okay.
But when you look up in the constellations and you see Asar, or let's call it Orion,
Right.
if you look, and those three stars of the belt, if you go down and to the left, that's where Sirius
Right.
is.
Okay.
Now, Sirius is a play on the word of Osiris or Osiris,
Osar.
okay, who
Which was
was
the
given birth
Egyptian
by
god.
Aset.
Right. Okay.
Okay, now underneath that you have another constellation known as Lepus, which is the hare or the rabbit. Now,
Okay.
the hare or the rabbit in Kemet was known as Unefer. Unefer, the perfect word. So when you have the perfect word, that's why they call Sirius the barker, who warned Orion, the hunter, where the rabbit was, which is a very violent story. Because Unefer represented to the Kemites your consciousness.
Okay.
Asar was not hunting a rabbit to eat. Asar was hunting his consciousness. And it was Sirius that was the barker that told Asar, you're standing on your consciousness. Because Unefer is right under the constellation. The constellation of Lepus, or the hare, is right under Orion. When you move beyond that, you have Taurus, who is the bull. Okay, that's Apis.
You're losing me.
Okay, then I want to stop. Because what I'm saying is that what they're doing is that they are taking a mythological story and making it seem like aliens actually came down. And what
So you You don't believe Osar and Isis came from this system?
No. Osar and Aset came out of the mind of African people in inner Africa that created a constellation in the heavens that described heaven on earth. And in the Shabaka stone, you have this wonderful story. It's a phenomenal story. But people get so caught up in the grandeur of this big story about these aliens coming down, and they're selling books and they're making movies and they're making a whole bunch of money on African thought that if you really learn to live that way of living, you yourself would become one with God, because each and every one of us is God having a human experience.
And our ancestors aren't from this solar system.
Our ancestors are from everywhere.
Okay.
We are everything and
We are
everywhere.
creatures of the universe.
We are cosmic beings, because when you take dark matter and you take dark energy, there's more dark energy than dark matter. When you take that energy and force matter in on itself, when there's no more space internally, that entity will explode, and that explosion comes out of nanodiamonds. Stars are crystallized blackness.
Crystallized blackness.
Just like come down on Earth.
Or
Look
black
at when you
holes.
put blackness under pressure on the Earth, underground, what does it become? It becomes
Oil.
diamonds.
Oh, that's right. That's right. That's right.
Crystallized things, stars, diamonds, they're all crystallized blackness. That blackness put under pressure. And you see, whether they realize it or not, Brother Leroy, black folk on Earth have been put under
That's
pressure
right.
for 400-500 years, 2,000 years if you want to get
Been
real
tested.
technical.
We're being tested.
And we are
And
diamonds.
we are diamonds in the
And
rough.
the children who you see in the classrooms are indeed diamonds, and the opposer knows this. That's why they're not being educated. Their energy, their mind is not like ours. They're born outside the Negro mentality. They have no fear. That's why when we see what they do, you say, how do you do this?
Well, didn't
But
we come up like that? Didn't we come
we
up like
we
that?
came up with confidence.
50s.
I'm dealing with. Okay, I'm not denying that. We're talking about our generation, the generation we came up. We call it the Snooky Bowl
Sugar Bowl.
generation. That was the gathering. That was the watering hole. That was the oasis.
This is the 50s in New York.
There is a notion of what some people call the indigo children. And those children, that's a term put on this generation of children, regardless of race, regardless of geography, regardless of class. There's a different mindset. But what I'm interested in as a black man in America is that group that comes from out of us. And when you look
what I'm saying.
let me just finish. When you look at black children today, you're not looking at the children that came up during our time.
Of course not.
It's a whole different different spirit,
I know.
which we are responsible for. We're responsible for nurturing those youngsters into the gods that they've been prepared, going back to that pressure that you're talking about. And it is, last point, black guys, I'm talking about black guys. I'm not, I'm not dealing with the Negro term chauvinist. I'm not dealing with all that. But I'm talking about black guys who rise very high in corporate America, have gone through a lot of pressure. And when you find them in that position, they're not necessarily Negroes that have been put in position for affirmative action sake.
Yeah.
They're individuals
Today.
who have gone through a lot of pressure, and they're good and excellent at what they do. Same thing with the females, but I haven't had the contact. I've been out of the scene in corporate America for quite some time, but the black women coming up the same way. We've been put under pressure in terms of our existence here in America, and we have, as a result, we're not an oppressed people. We are the diamonds that he's referring to. We are actually diamond, but we don't believe it. Once we begin to believe it and nurture and protect us like we protect the little stones, then you're going to see a whole dynamic change in black people in America. My thought.
My point of bringing up our era, we're both 76. So we were bred in a completely different environment.
He's always exposing me. I'm
Because
coming up like teenager Bob. You understand? With gray hair.
it's something to be proud of.
Teenager Bob.
Because we still have that youthful vigor that we always had. I mean, but that was the 50s because we played it like what's his name? Gil Noble.
Yeah.
He said we didn't believe Malcolm. Malcolm was crazy for us. Put an X on your last name, we were getting along.
Right.
I mean, we knew
name,
how,
right?
we knew there was a problem, but we knew how to maneuver around it. We knew they were fools, because look, they laid in the sun, tried to get a suntan, didn't like us because we were brown already. So we knew that I mean, that's
Well,
a joke.
Let me just say this, that generation that he's referring to, we've never been a down people.
Yeah, there you go.
We've been a people who have been under attack and taken on many of the vices that has been put into
That's
the
it.
community.
There you go.
And have fallen victim to
There
that.
you go. There you go.
The picture of us that's been projected is the end result of those vices and drugs, et cetera, that's been put on us.
Right.
But we're not that. We are way different than that. That the generation he's referring to is a generation, the mid-50s into the 60s. And definitely we did not catch the onslaught of the heroin traffic that was pushed
there.
into the
Come
black.
on.
It was
I had a
there,
brother was a junkie. Come on.
yeah, but what I'm saying,
It was always there.
the victimization was a guy 20 blocks away, and that's where they were. Coming into the 60s and 70s, you see a whole marketplace of drug addicts, and you tend to take that image as being the real thing.
Well,
but
then you focus on the 80s and the planned genocide being crack.
yes,
And that was and even before that, I mean, cocaine was a social plus. Only at $100 a gram, only the rich could afford it. And they were in all the bars. You walk into a bar and you're drinking too much, and somebody took you to the bathroom, gave you a 1-on-1, and you go out and drink some more. So that's how I got introduced to it. I was staggering around drunk in a bar, and the guy took me in the bathroom. He said, "Try this." And I couldn't stand putting anything in my nose, but I was able to talk again. I was able to communicate, talk to the ladies, and so that's how that got into. But when they turned it around and made it an industry, and put it in the middle of gangs in the West Coast, the Crips and the Bloods started competing against selling drugs. That was planned genocide by the CIA. They started bringing it in, and that was part of our downfall. But we didn't have, I mean, you had junkies and you had drugs in the 50s, but still we had an idea that we could become, we were Americans.
Yeah.
We were the baddest things out there. I mean, especially in New York, when we came up, man, we were Mr. Clean. We were dressing like this in the 50s.
But you see, imagine how the Creator works, though. Because, like I've told you, brother, I didn't grow up far from here, the Amsterdam
That's
houses.
right.
Right up the block. Right up,
Right
I
up the-
passed the pool that we used to go to on 59th Street, swimming during the summertime.
Right.
So this is my neighborhood. I remember when the brothers that used to play basketball in the playground in the projects no longer played with us anymore. They would sit on a bench over to the side.
And watch you.
And they would watch, well, they would have their other friends with them. And this was the beginning of introducing drugs in the community. I remember that car every other Thursday that would come into the community and park up on Amsterdam Avenue, right off of 63rd Street. We knew that was the drug car. We knew they were bringing drugs into the
What
community.
year are we talking?
Well, right now we're talking, I would say we're talking, this would have been 65, 66,
Oh, yeah.
1967,
Yeah.
1968.
Oh, wow.
Okay,
yeah.
because I was born
Vietnam.
53.
Okay.
And so I remember these things very clearly. And what they did is that to make this business going into the 80s, and because remember, before crack, the thing that hit, and Gil Scott-Heron did a song on it, was Angel Dust.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that was the chemicalization of certain things. That began the chemicalization of things. But isn't it interesting how nature and the Creator works? Because while they made those drugs illegal and put us in prison, charged us with all sorts of things. Up underneath that came prescription drugs.
Right.
And now look at the opioid epidemic in the country today.
That's it.
They thought they could just bring it in and give it to us. They said, oh, they're animals anyway. Give it to
Yeah,
the blacks
yeah.
and the Hispanics. And,
Right.
okay, and go ahead, yeah. But what they didn't know is that in making it illegal for us, they put us in prison. But what they didn't know is they legalized their own enslavement to opioids and to all these other drugs that they're into. They're not going to jail. But what is the problem? The problem is not going to jail. You have more access to them. And because they're legal, you have more access to. So they're killing themselves. And that's how nature works. You know, my mama used to always say, be careful.
Chickens coming home to roost.
He who digs the pit falls in. You know, chickens come home to roost.
Right.
All of these things are dynamic concepts that we have to look at. And as a community, we have to work our way out of this situation because we have it in us to make this happen. I honestly believe that all that Harriet Tubman did, all that Dr. Clark and Dr. Ben, I can go through the list of
Yeah.
the Asa Hilliards and the Shashi McIntyres and the Jeannie Baines and all the great, they did not do all that they did to leave us abandoned like
That's right.
this. When Harriet Tubman did what she did it for a day that even we're not yet there. She saw our emancipation. She saw our liberation. We have the DNA of the pyramid builders. We have the DNA of the plantation dwellers. We have the DNA of the project dwellers, but we also have the DNA of the promised land.
Right.
And we're on our way there as we speak. Going to be a lot of us not going to make it.
Yeah, we have to be mentally prepared.
Absolutely.
You know what? I want to play this opening of Hidden Colors 4. Hidden Colors 4, the first one. Not the one on, but run the one that the opening, all right? And this, Leroy, you got to watch this. Hidden Colors 4, I just watched it last night. I got it from Amazon. Oh, man. Every black person on the planet should watch this.
They've done a tremendous
All
job
people
with that
should watch
series.
it. It's called The Religion of White Supremacy. Donald Trump's the star.
And it's interesting because what I open up with, my son Haru gave me the line to give. He said, yo, Dad, make sure you say this. And so what I open up with is
We're gonna hear
exactly what he told me to say. So now we're talking about the youth and their perception of the world around them. And that's why I say, having been with them so long, don't give up.
The white supremacists like to show dominance is by using sexual exploitation. People who are dominated socially can be dominated sexually.
Sex is a way in which you show your domination. It's like a male dog gets on another male dog and humps on him. He's not after the sex, he's showing he dominates. I'm in control.
If you have a system in place to guarantee your very survival, you will use any means at your disposal. So sex then becomes a tool. This whole idea of creating a mulatto caste is designed to create a buffer between the whites and the blacks. You give more privileges to this mulatto caste.
Even Chancellor Williams, in his book, he was claiming that due to a biracial population which came about from Greek mixing with the indigenous African population there, it rose up another army which fought against their African mothers and fathers.
In Africa, when the Europeans came in, the Portuguese would mate with the Africans, and their offspring would be called Lancados. And the Lancados were the offspring of African and Europeans. And what happened was the Lancados, the mixed offspring of the Europeans and the Africans, they became slave traders themselves because, again, a lot of biracial children would take on the ideology of the father. So whenever you see people talk about, well, Africans sold other Africans, this is really who they're talking about.
When the Inquisition came, many of the Jews left Portugal and went to West Africa. This is during the period of the 14 and 1500s. And they became the people who were running the slave trade. Some were Christians, some were Jews, many were Jews. And what they would do was marry African women, usually from a chieftaincy family or somebody where they can get in good. And they would use the offspring of these marriages to be the middlemen in the slave trade. That went on all over West Africa.
it was the mulattoes who did Haiti as much, if not more harm than the French. Because there's this thing about white supremacy is a very infectious disease. And when you buy into the lie that white or light skin is superior to black or dark skin, then we'll find instances where a mixed race black would be more vicious than a white person, because they have to prove to the white person that I'm on your side, I'm okay.
Mulattoes have always been used. The French were good at that, setting it up in Trinidad. They had the different staircases of mulattoes and octoroons, octagons, and different classifications of mulattoes. And they give the mulattoes the power over the darker skinned ones. And then on top of the mulattoes were the white people. It's another way of buffering yourself from the attack. So when black people get angry, they got to go through to beat the mulattoes to get to the white people. So that was actually a buffer zone in the manipulation and controlling the people.
You had a ship full of African men, women, and children who were at the mercy of the captain and all the sailors on that crew. And those men could have sex with anybody they wanted to. The women, the children, and the men.
You out at sea 3 months, tied down with these white men. There ain't no women there for the most part. When they start bringing women, they weren't even bringing women. They were bringing girls between the ages of 6 and 15 and raping them all. But they also were raping the men. Same things was happening on the plantation to demasculinize the black man.
Control the slave population is to rape a father in front of his sons, or to take the biggest, baddest black man on the plantation and do something horrible to him to completely humiliate and emasculate him so that people won't respect him anymore. And that still happens to this day.
In the Caribbean, they had seasoning plantations, which were plantations used to break the slaves. And one plantation or one place that had a lot of seasoning plantations was Jamaica. And people have to wonder, what were they doing on these seasoning plantations that was worse than what was happening on the regular plantations? Well, one thing that they were doing on these plantations, especially in Jamaica, they were doing a process called buck breaking, where the white supremacist slave owner or the white supremacist overseer would literally rape black men in front of the whole black population in order to break his spirit, in order to break him down as a man, in order to show dominance against him, in order to show the rest of the black population that this is not your leader. I just made your leader submit to me sexually. And this happened a lot in Jamaica. This is why homosexuality is so looked down upon in Jamaican culture today.
And it was a way primarily of cutting down those who would rebel. In other words, it was a matter of power and control and domination. And they would call it buck busting, but it was really butt busting.
Slavery continued until 1865 for about 2 generations, right? So how do you reconcile that? You can no longer bring in Africans, but you still have the business of slavery. So they still needed Africans to do the work down south, especially after the cotton gin was invented. So you had the creation of breeding farms. 2 of the largest slave breeding farms in the United States.
Welcome back. We have Professor Jeffries join us. Professor Jeffries.
Well, it's a homecoming. It's good to be back.
Yeah, welcome home.
It's been a little moment, but
welcome home.
It's always good to be, and certainly with my brother Kaba. Hey.
Right?
Yes, he's the generation that has inherited this explosion of information, and he's passing it down. And he's always traveling with his son and working with young people. So
yeah, his son is here with us today.
I greeted him.
Okay.
And he's been a teacher, so he's been through the process of trying to put this explosion of information in the classroom, not for the college students, but for the junior high. And so he's had an enormous experience as
well, we were
someone
just going
trying
over
to get this information into our community.
Before you got here.
Yes.
The beginning, the Dogon tribe and Brother Kaba gave us a good indication about what white supremacists do when they get information, African information. They sort of always distort it. Well, we all know that the the Egyptians were black people. But according to Elizabeth Taylor, she was Cleopatra in our minds, in our day. But tell us a little bit about this Hidden Colors 4, which I found amazing. I watched it last night, me and my wife, and we were just, and I had Brother Kaba coming on today, and I was just so excited to talk about this. I mean, I've heard a couple of things here about Jamaica that I never knew. I thought I knew quite a bit about Jamaica, but let's clue us in about this mulatto, the boulets that exist today.
Well, I haven't changed since the last time I was here.
Well, that's why I brought this up.
And Dr. Francis Cress Welsing had a mentor, Neely Fuller, and he always said if you didn't understand racism, white supremacy, everything else you thought you knew would be a confusion. My approach adding to that is if you do not have a systems analysis, all of this information and knowledge that you're putting together is not going to allow you to deal with it the way you should and produce your own system capability. So it's not just a question of racial mixing or Jamaica being one of the centers of the process of butt breaking. I mean, that happened throughout the system. That was a part of the system. So no need to single out Jamaica. Jamaica just happened to be one of the largest of the enterprises of enslavement because it was a larger island. St. Croix, St. Kitts, and the other islands are...
Well, I had never heard of the men being raped by the slave owner. I'd never heard the men being raped by slave owners.
Well, that's one of the reasons why we have to have a systems analysis. The European system, going back to their most significant moments in history, have men raping men. Greek culture is centered on a mentor and a mentee. That's not just an intellectual or spiritual relationship, that's a sexual relationship. Greek warriors had a process of being developed into their manhood with a relationship with men. So that if you understand European culture and you understand it's coming out of the foundation of cave culture, where they put a premium on the physical strength of the male child. Because one female child could produce several children. The male child was prized. So they had infanticide, killing of certain children that could not become this prototype of the warrior. And certainly killing the female children because you only needed one or two to produce. So it's a deep cultural process that's systemic in their cultures, right up through the Roman Catholic Church, where you have to, they're acting like they're surprised about predator relationships in the Roman Catholic. Well, you put men together for centuries and you house them together. What are they going to do? Look for squirrels to play with? So we have to have a systems analysis, and then these things won't surprise us. You know. So, but the devastation of the enslavement process was to dehumanize. So it's a psychological and a physical. The wonder of it all is that we survived it. Native American populations were devastated. African populations had the resilience to resist it and to begin to put, now we have the potential of putting our system in place. And that's why the educators and those touching into this knowledge are so important. I just finished reading a book. I couldn't put it down. Ebony and Ivy. The relationship of the education, the best education, the Yale, the Princeton, the Rutgers, the Columbia, the Georgetown. The slave process was woven into these great institutions. And that should be our pursuit of this knowledge, should be what we should be all about, because we've survived it. And with the exposure of information about the Nile, I brought the Tekken. This is another one. The same brothers producing Hidden Colors and whatnot have produced the Tekken, the symbol that in this nation, your president, Trump, the chump, is telling people to pay
Don't
attention
you dare
to
put
the.
them on me.
I've laid them right at your feet. Boom. And so
You haven't heard the names I've been calling them.
when I see you toss them out, and I say, okay, good, my brother is incorrect. But worshiping European anthems, European flags, European systems, in Washington, D.C., as Brother Kaba and others have known, that this tradition that we call the Nile Valley tradition, Kemet, has been institutionalized. Greeks did it to give themselves a place in history, and then they were followed by the Romans who did it. And then the Anglo-Saxons eventually, and the Catholics did it, so that you have this symbol of the male penis. That's a sacred symbol for all of these secret societies, all of these religious traditions. In the middle of the Vatican, you have this circular Vatican courtyard, and in the middle is one of the most significant male penises coming directly out of the Nile Valley. And on the top of it, they have a cross. In the formation of your nation's capital, meaning Washington, D.C., I've moved myself out of this country psychologically, so I deal with the world globally. So, but your capital in Washington, the most important symbol and building there is the so-called Washington Monument, which is built at a certain height. I believe it's 555 feet, but it represents a deep African understanding of the relationship between the male and the female, and the material and the spiritual, but they just taken it for its physical size, but they also want to take the traditions behind it, and they have reworked them in their perverted ways of believing in relationships between male and female, between male and male, between the spiritual and the... And so we have to redo all of this. I think this guy, Kelly, who we thought was going to try to temper the so-called president, he revealed himself too. He's been processed by the same white supremacy system. And so our understanding of it means that we know that we cannot use this system but anything more than surviving. If we really want to go where we need to go, we have to go through the survival process, transform into a culture of development where we control the economics, politics, and culture of our world.
Let's concentrate on that point. How do we, come out of this? What are solutions of understanding this buck busting and the forming of mulattoes, so being breed, so we don't have this Willie Lynch syndrome amongst us, light against dark, like I'm in control because I'm light-skinned, or I get favors because I'm light-skinned, or other dark-skinned blacks thinking I only got ahead because I was light-skinned. I've had that. But I just was smarter than everybody else, as far as I was concerned.
But that's the system of that's what we're trying to deal with. And
that's what we have to deal with that.
Well, we have to get out of that system, as Dr. Jeffries says, and create our own.
Okay.
Because we only act like that when we're in their system.
Right.
And so we have got to create a system where we understand, because we don't act like this towards each other.
Can we take this system and just reform it to our ways?
I think this system is in very serious trouble. As it to me, as it relates to a system is a system.
Okay.
But it's the spirit that guides it.
Okay.
This is a very toxic, poisonous system.
Right.
Dr. Edwin Nichols talks about the axiology of the human family.
Right.
And he talks about,
brother.
Yeah, a phenomenal, and he got a lot of stuff up on YouTube. I encourage people to Google his name, Edwin Nichols, Nichols. He talks about the relationship that Asians had because of the nature of them being where they were geographically. Everybody had to depend on the group.
Okay.
And so they have an individual to group mentality. They relate to the group. The group is what's important to them.
Okay.
African people have a person-to-person relationship. That's very important to us, to be able to interact with each other, because when we interact with each other, our relationship creates the community upon which, so we are more into a person-to-person relationship. The European mentality is the person to material wealth, going back to the Ice Age mentality, where you are going to depend on your material wealth because that's what's going to help you survive.
Right.
So what we have to do is something that Dr. Edward Nichols says, which I think is very important, because many of us go to work and we work with peoples of European descent, and we sit and we laugh, we joke, we talk about our families and all so wonderful. Now at 5 o'clock or even at lunch, you can go out and that same person that you had a wonderful conversation with will pass you on the street and not say a word to you. And that is because they basically objectify you. Mm-hmm. You're an object to them. And so therefore there's no personal relationship. And then we get very offended. We say, wow, we was getting along and everything, and now all of a sudden they don't talk to me or whatever. But we shouldn't take offense to that. What we ought to do is do to them what they do to us. Objectify them. Mm-hmm. Because quite frankly, if I pass you, you don't speak to me, I don't care. I didn't really want to talk to you either. If you want to talk to me, then that's another thing. But as it relates to those who objectify you, you have to objectify them and don't take it personal. Right. They don't see you as a living entity. They see you as an object. They interact with you as an object. That's their system. Mm-hmm. When we see the Asian community, they don't hire outside of their own community. Right. They respond to the group. We're the only ones that try to hire everybody because we have a person-to-person relationship.
Isn't that our spiritual energy?
Well, that's the important point, that our person-to-person relationship deals significantly with the spiritual component. Yeah. Just as the so-called Washington Monument or the Tekken is a spiritual understanding for African people at its center. But for the European, it means a materialistic value system.
Don't we have, isn't it our job to teach them how to be human?
No.
But if we have the spiritual energy.
That's true, but for me, I'm speaking about myself.
Okay.
I don't have time for that anymore.
Okay.
Right. There's too many folk out here that I know, and Dr. Jeffries, as he travels and there are too many people out here that want this information. As a human being, I know I have a certain amount of time on this earth. Okay. I want to impact the people who are ready to make this move. I'm not interested in converting anymore. I'm not trying to make you like me. I don't care if you like me. Okay? Right. It ain't got nothing to do with my spirituality. It just has to do with the amount of time I have on this earth as it relates to the people who are ready to make this move. Let's move it together, but I just don't have that time anymore.
Well,
and we're spending too much of our time. I'll say again?
A lot of black people aren't ready for that.
Then I'm not talking to them either.
Okay. There you go.
I'm talking to people who are ready to make this move, man. I'm talking about when you want to light a fireplace, you light the log that's closest to you. Right. That log lights number 2, 2 lights 3, 3 lights 4. You have a roaring fireplace, but you only lit one log.
That's right.
We don't have time. I have good news, I have bad news. Dr. King was right. We are going to make it to the promised land. That's the good news. The bad news is a lot of us ain't gonna make it.
Well, isn't one of our basic problems the Willie Lynch syndrome?
In their system it is. In our system it doesn't work. If you take a crab, everybody talks about the crabs in the basket, but if you take that crab out of that basket and return it back to the waters, crabs actually help each other. They stack themselves on each other, and the one on the top eats. When the top one eats, dines sufficient, it goes to the bottom and lifts the group up, so the next one eats. When that one eats, it goes to the bottom, lifts the group up. If you take a natural entity and take it out of its natural environment, put it in an unnatural environment, it is natural for that natural entity to act unnatural in an unnatural environment. As African people taken out of our system, as Dr. Jeffries speaks about, losing our values, our interests, our principles, our language, our history, it is only natural that we should act like this. What we have to do is have our own system, built on the politics and the economics and the spirituality of our people. Dr. Jeffries talks about the pyramid concept. We have to get away from trying to, there are people who are just not ready. And as Erica Badu say, maybe next lifetime, but I don't have time for you in this one.
And the Tekken is a symbol of resurrection and rebirth. And so that is a continual process, and in spite of an enormous death, so the story behind the symbol, in spite of an enormous death of 2 brothers at lockerheads with each other and producing the devastation, out of that death comes new life. And so we have to understand that we have enough African peoples on the continent and our cousins for us to focus on. These others may never get where we need to go, but we know that their lifetime will end. But we're talking about building for eternity. These symbols and whatnot that we see in our culture, these institutions, these processes are for building for eternity. So we can tap into the ancient cultures, not just in the Nile Valley. What has happened is as we got deep into this, in the Congo, Africans devised a system of linking up spiritually in the so-called savanna areas, in the desert. They're now finding all kinds of symbols, Netapayo and the rest of them, that Africans in the areas that were not heavily irrigated still were relating to the movement of the heavenly bodies and the stars. So we need to look to ourselves and find our system, and then as we expand it, there might be opportunities for other folks, but we have a primary responsibility for dealing with that which has been given the responsibility of leading the human family.
Well,
And as Harriet Tubman said, her greatest achievement was that she freed thousands of slaves. Her greatest disappointment was she could have freed thousands more had they only known they were slaves.
Amen.
There's a lot of folk out here that just don't get it right now. I love you unconditionally. I love our people unconditionally. I think it's magnificent, Dr. Jeffries, as you said about the fact that despite everything that they did, we still are here.
That's
We're still alive. We're still doing something. And we still can smile. We still can love. We still can have that power. So that's to be celebrated.
Yeah, amen.
But the bottom line is that at this point in our history, looking at what we know we can push this forward. We have the Gilchrist experience, where the information is here. We have our Dr. Jeffries, and you know, we have our Oba Tashakas and our Dr. Wade Nobles and James Smalls, you know, and we have the memories of Shashi McIntyre, Jeannie Bain, and Jerry Price, who have done phenomenal things. Can't forget Dr. Clark or Dr. Ben. I mean, we could do libation right now.
Yeah, right.
But the bottom line is that we just don't have the time to have to bring on board people who are not quite ready. We have to work with those that are ready to make this happen, who want this information, who will contact you and say, how can I get more information, who will contact myself or contact Dr. Jeffries that want this information on the emails, through the internet, whatever it is, and we work with those individuals and let them be the second log that will light the third to the fourth.
All right, I'm going to take this on as a task to bring us all together so we can get our communications straight and get a system. And we'll start right here at this system right here at the Gilchrist Experience. And thank you for showing up, Doc.
Well, it's the
Should've
creator
came
brought me here.
5:45, but that's all right. But, you know, again, thank you for coming to the Gilchrist Experience. Brother Kaba, this is just a start, because we're going to do a lot more. We have the Moors to talk about. We have a million things to talk about. And I want you all to watch Hidden Colors 4. This one particularly impressed me because it's the religion of white supremacy, which Doc always talks about. It's a system analysis. And this analyzes the whole thing. Oh, it really gives you a breakdown. And thank you for coming again for the Gilchrist Experience. The God in me loves the God in you. Stay tuned for more of the Gilchrist Experience. Power to the people.
All right.
Thank you, brothers.
All right.
Amen.